So why are intervals so important? Intervals are important because they are the building blocks of scales. In order to have a major scale, you have to have certain intervals within, in order to have a major chord, you have to have certain intervals within that scale to make up that particular chord. So what I mean is, if you look at a piece of music and it says G7, that telegraphs to you certain information, and there's a lot of information packed in that simple notation of G7. What that tells you is a G major chord with a seventh. And in order to know what notes go in that chord, you have to understand intervals. So what I'd like to do is explain intervals to you, but first of all, let's define what an interval is. An interval is a space between two notes. So if you go from, remember on our power chord how I said you needed the root and the fifth? So if I go from the root to the fifth, that's the interval of a fifth. So any two notes can be, the space between those notes can be measured and can be identified in a very specific way. So we talked about scale degrees, and let's just review that really quickly. Remember that you can label the 8 notes in a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the 8 it actually starts over again. Well, if we wanted to identify the space between two notes in the G major scale, here's how we would do that. If we go from G to A, that's going from the first degree to the second degree, okay? And because we're in a major key, we call that a major second. So that's the interval of a major second, because we're in a major key, and we went from the first degree to the second degree. That's a major second. Now what about a major third? Well, if I'm in a major key, which we are, we're in the key of G major, if I go from the first to the third degree, that's a major third. That's going from the first degree to the third, so that's an interval of a major third. What about the fourth? Well, let's count up. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I go from this note, which is G, to the fourth, right, which is D, excuse me, not D, C, then that's called a perfect fourth. Now why is it a major fourth or a minor fourth? Well, the fourth and the fifth have exceptions. They're either perfect, augmented, or diminished. A fourth and a fifth will never be major or minor. So those are the only two exceptions that you'll need to know. So we now know from the smallest interval basically is a second, and in this case is a major second because you're in the key of G major. We've identified a third. We've identified a perfect fourth. We've identified or now we're going to identify the perfect fifth. And that's my power chord, remember? Okay, so we've played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's play the sixth. So from G up to the sixth degree in the key of G, which is E, that's going to be a major sixth because we're in the key of G major. Go up to the seventh, okay, which is F sharp. So G to F sharp is a major seventh. And then if I go up one more, that's the interval of an octave. So now you understand that in the key, if you're in a major key, the intervals that are not perfect are going to be minor, and if you're in a major key, they're going to be major if they're not perfect. So let me give you a real world example of why this is important. Remember that G7th chord I was telling you about? Well, I can tell you right now that if I wanted to make a G7th chord, I know it's a major chord, but I have to have the seventh in it because it tells me in the notation G7. So what's the seventh in the key of G? Well, let's count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I know that if I'm going to have a G major chord, I've got to have at least the G and the 7. So there's my G7 chord. And that's actually a G major seventh. Most of the time a G7 means a G dominant 7, and we'll talk about what that means next.